in my shoes, world on my shoulders, a heart full of blues out in the dirt, down in the dirt. I've been a real bad boy on the town all night, starting to calm down with the morning light. I'm in the dirt, down in the dirt. Been a real bad boy. I've been a real bad boy on the town all night, starting to calm down with the morning light. I'm in the dirt, down in the dirt, down in the dirt, down in the dirt, down in the dirt.
And we are live. Today we are streaming on LinkedIn, YouTube, and Twitter Periscope. We cut Facebook out. Who cares about Facebook at this point? We can't get them all right, so we're going to focus on the ones we think we do pretty well with. Going to be an interesting stream today. I've got a new bottle here I'm trying out for this stream. This right here is Detling 1867 bourbon. This is an Alabama bourbon. So it's supposedly famous for being the first bourbon produced in the state of Alabama. So we're going to give that a try. We're going to pour ourselves a little drink here. We're going to try to not overdo it. We got a lot of stuff to do today. So as always, or at least for the last several months, this live stream is sponsored by Mage Mojo. So I got to run the sponsorship stuff. I suck at selling things to you folks. I produced a nice shiny commercial that we could run. So we're going to run that, and then we'll get right into the content. The following broadcast is sponsored by Mage Mojo. And I want to take a minute and talk about Magento hosting, because Magento hosting is a lot like hauling stuff in my Tundra here. It's about having a tool that is sized properly for the job. This Tundra's great if I'm on the farm and I want to tow something like my old pickup truck here. But what if I wanted to tow something bigger, like, say, a space shuttle? Well, then this just isn't the right tool for the job. We know this because Toyota did it. This is a publicity stunt to show how awesome this truck is. And sure, it's pulling it, but look at how slow it is. Those people on foot are literally having to slow down to not pass this thing. And that's a lot like Magento in that you need a proper hosting environment. I've been doing Magento as long as Magento's been doing Magento, and in all of that time, I've never seen somebody who can build a site to overcome improper hosting. And with increasing customer demands, slow is just not acceptable. Mage Mojo understands the needs of Magento merchants because they focus only on Magento hosting, and they've built a reputation as a premier Magento hosting provider. They've built an incredible Magento cloud hosting platform so that their customers enjoy the speed, reliability, and scalability of cloud servers. And if you geek out about technical details, ask them about how they provide automatic horizontal scaling for free. With cloud hosting from Mage Mojo, there's no more worrying about flash sales or Cyber Monday traffic. If you operate a Magento store, then you need to check out Mage Mojo Hosting. The link is in the description of this live stream, or you can just go to magemojo.com. That's magemojo.com. All right, now that all the selling is out of the way, we can get right into this juicy e-commerce goodness. We're going to talk about SEO a little bit. Really, page speed is what we're going to be focused on with today's live stream. Not the sexiest of topics. I understand that. You guys tend to really get excited when we get on technical stuff. Probably a sign of who we've actually created content for in the past. But PageSpeed is something that has a lot of depth to it, and I wanted to be able to explore that a little more. So we've got an expert. Of course, I try to bring an expert on for everything because I tend to know a little bit about everything. But if we want to go deep, we've got to have an expert. So today we've got Erwin Hofman on the stream. Erwin, I appreciate you coming on to talk about PageSpeed. If you would, introduce yourself. Tell everybody a little bit, everybody out there, a little bit about yourself.
Thanks for having me. Well, I'm a developer, so I'm not the best in introducing myself, but I'll try. I'm a front-end and back-end developer. Nowadays, more of a front-end developer. I'm also concerned about security, obviously, privacy, and accessibility. But today we're going to talk about the first being PageSpeed and front-end.
All right. So as always, this is a Q&A. So if you have questions, if you want to participate in this chat, please do so. We are taking questions and your comments on LinkedIn and YouTube. If you happen to be catching this on Periscope, I don't really have a way of pulling those in. If you tweet at me, I'll see that. But otherwise, we will be looking for the conversation on LinkedIn and YouTube. So be sure to get over there and post your comments. As always, I have some softball questions. You guys always ask the best questions, so we'll start with mine. Let's start with a definition for the uninitiated. If you happen to make your way over here and you're not really sure, why PageSpeed's important or what Google PageSpeed is, and can you maybe explain to us a little bit about the Google PageSpeed tool and why that should be important for e-commerce merchants?
Well, Google PageSpeed in particular, you could use other tools as well, like I've written it down, Pingdom Tools, GTmetric. Webpagetest.org is famous for its videos. But I like to use Google PageSpeed or the underlying engine Lighthouse, being Lighthouse, as it is also telling you something about the individual metrics which are impacting the user experience. So it is telling you more than just a checklist of things you could do. It's also taking into account the user experience part of your shop or just website. So that's the reason why I like to use Lighthouse or PageSpeed Insights to begin with. And obviously, on top of that, you could use Webpagetest to do a video comparison. There are several individual metrics which I think are more important than just the overall PageSpeed score.
Like what? What metrics are more important than the PageSpeed score?
I like to think that there are two two important metrics, being first meaningful paint, as it is telling you something about the meaningful content, as well as the time to interactive, as the time to interactive is telling you something about the amount of JavaScript and also the impact of JavaScript on the user experience.
So if those two metrics are in order, say the first meaningful paint and the time to interactive are relatively low, but then my page takes forever to load, that can be acceptable, or is it a balance? Do you have to kind of balance the three of those?
I don't know if I understand your question correctly.
What if you said those two are more important than the overall page speed? How much more important? Like if those metrics are good, like if I test my site and my time to interactive and first meaningful paint are low numbers, they're quick, but the page speed is really slow. Is that acceptable? I mean, is that an acceptable scenario, or do I have to have all three of those in order?
Well, it could be acceptable, but when you do have an optimal time to interactive, then most of the time your first meaningful paint would also be okay. So your overall score would also be orange or maybe even green. So that's not a situation which would occur often. It could be the other way around, like having a a good score, but not a good overall score, but not an optimal first meaningful paint. For example, we had one website scoring 93% on mobile, so that's quite good. But from that score on, we even managed to improve the score by 3 times. So the first meaningful paint was 3.5 seconds, 3.2 seconds, and we managed to get it to only 1 second on mobile. So the overall score was okay, but you can still improve.
And we're going to try to. Oh, go ahead.
I wanted to say that's why the individual metrics are important as well.
Right. We're going to maybe look at some sites here a little later in the stream. So if anybody has any sites we should actually pull up and kind of examine their page speed scores, let me know in the chat, and we'll try to add those to the list. I've got a couple I'm going to pull up, but if we have time, we might add some to that list as well. So how do these metrics affect e-commerce merchants? A lot of merchants I talk to, they like, site needs to be fast, but they don't really understand the ramifications of what that means. So what are the consequences of ignoring your page speed, and maybe the benefits of focusing and improving on it?
Well, I'm more of a developer than a marketing guy, but I would say it is being said that it has an impact on the ranking, and you can find articles stating that it has a direct impact on ranking. I'm not sure if that's the case, but it does have impact on obviously the bounce rate, or maybe the so-called dwell time or pogo sticking. And it is being said that those metrics have influence on your ranking. So there is an indirect impact on your ranking. And obviously also your ad costs would decrease when you've got a fast website. And Chrome even announced that they're going to introduce a badge of shame. Well, the community is calling it a badge of shame when you've got a slow loading web page or website or web shop.
Now, what's the definition of slow loading? Like, how slow does it have to be considered slow loading?
Yeah, there are different articles as well on this topic. What is slow? When do you have a slow website? And that's where the individual metrics are important again, because you can have an optimal first meaningful paint and a slow time to interactive, or you can have a slow first meaningful paint to begin with. So it differs, but I would say somewhere from 5 seconds would be slow. But yet again, it's all about the individual metrics.
Okay. We've got a question in the chat here from Walter Dieters. Walter, thanks for watching and supporting the live stream. His question is, Erwin, for example, in Magento 2.3.x, we see that it's possible to do something with critical CSS. Would that be a game changer for Magento 2 for mobile optimization, in your opinion?
Well, it's a start. It's a good start, as you can influence the so-called first meaningful paint. There you have it again, and thus the so-called perceived performance. So you can play with your visitor, kind of, to change the user experience. So you can give your visitor another loading experience by introducing critical CSS. But at the same time, obviously, within Magento and any other site and web shop, we still have JavaScript, and JavaScript has an impact as well. Nowadays, even the main bottleneck because of CPU boundaries on our devices. So it is a good start to introduce critical CSS, yeah.
And another question here, Sam in the chat. Sam, thanks for watching, and I appreciate your question. Sam's question is more around optimizing checkout for Magento 2.3.3. Have you done any checkout optimization in Magento? Are there any tips? Maybe if you have any tips you have about that, and if you haven't, maybe any kind of general tips about making sure the checkout is as fast as possible.
I don't have any experience in optimizing the checkout within Magento. I mostly focus on the so-called first meaningful paint. So when a visitor is visiting your web shop for the first time, and that's the moment where you have to grab your visitor, obviously. But I would say, and I guess it's also quite logic, I would say try to use as minimal JavaScript as possible. And only load, I guess that's the most important part of optimizing, only load the assets which are really needed within that page or within that action.
Yeah, Sam kind of mentions that. I think he says he's using Amnesty Checkout, but there's still just many default JavaScript that we can remove to optimize the JS for mobile. And I think that's one of the problems with Magento and kind of how it handles JavaScript. It's really difficult with Magento 2 theming to go through and kind of thin out all the JavaScript, because if you use their JavaScript merging and bundling, then it kind of loads all the JavaScript on every page. And so there's not an easy way to go through and clean all of that up, and you end up with just way too much JavaScript loaded on every page. So Sam, that's definitely something that needs some attention for sure. Sam's got another question here in the chat as well. Again, keep those questions coming. We are here for you. My questions are just middle of the road. If you got something in particular, then let me know in the chat. And Sam's question is, what are your thoughts on AMP? And AMP, for those that maybe don't know, are accelerated mobile pages, which is a Google initiative to where you can put a cached version of your pages for mobile in their search index. So what are your thoughts on AMP?
We introduced it within our solution, so we've got some experience with, quite a lot of experience with AMP. But the short explanation is when you put effort in creating an AMP equivalent for product pages, for example, I think you're better off spending that time at optimizing your original web shop. So it's true that AMP is enabling you to introduce an optimal blueprint, kind of optimal blueprint. But you can even become quicker when you're optimizing your own web shop. Obviously, it depends on how easy it is to optimize your own web shop or product pages. But I would say try to optimize your own product pages, because the moment you start enabling, you've kind of got two environments to maintain, because you've got your regular product pages and you've got your AMP product pages.
Yeah, it definitely adds another layer of overhead to managing your content. So that's great advice there. Keeping going in the chat, Sam mentions got huge improvement with accelerated mobile pages for homepage and category, but I can't go with whole site like shopping cart or product view. And then Walter comments on that you and Walter did an optimization in the past, and what y'all did, for example, was to get a better score is that we made the chat function a static file. If the visitor clicks on the static file, it would be loaded and not earlier. So basically moving a lot of that JavaScript into some sort of actually user clickable action rather than just loading it by default. Is that kind of a pretty common strategy to try to minimize the JavaScript? Is, a lot of it'll just load and run in the background, but you want to kind of push that to some sort of user action?
Yeah. Well, a good example could be a Google Maps within your footer, loaded using an iframe. And the iframe itself is loading a lot of new JavaScript and images and other stuff, other resources, adding some performance weight to your page. So a common, what you could do is lazy load your iframe. So those resources are only loaded as soon as the visitor is scrolling to the bottom of your page, to your footer, for example. But the example which Wouter is mentioning is what we did in a website. The website had a chat widget, and the chat widget caused the performance score to drop from 97% on mobile to 50%. And it was purely because of the amount of JavaScript. So what we did, we didn't load the chat. We reproduced the image, the chat button. We hosted it on our own site, and the CSS needed for styling the button. We merged the CSS with our own style sheet, or clicked on the button on mobile. Only then we loaded the needed JavaScript, external JavaScript. So that way you are kind of deferring the JavaScript and also deferring the performance hits. So that's a good way to optimize your page by looking for and cherry pick the widgets you could lazy load. So for example, the chat.
And we're actually getting a little bit of some breakup there. I'm going to take your feed back down to the lowest possible setting, just to make sure our upload speed is fine, Erwin. So you may see a little less quality, but it shouldn't affect what everybody else out there is seeing. See if that cleans it up a little bit. And Walter mentions in the chat here, let's get back to the title. Using Google Pagespeed to get more sales. And we're going to go through that a little more, really, in all of this. And the reason for that title, what I'm thinking is, the speed of your site affects so many things. It affects your conversion rates, your bounce rates, your SEO. All of those things have a profound impact on your sales. There's really only 3 stats that ultimately matter when it comes to how many sales you're going to get. And that's how many new customers you get, the average order value that you get from them, and then how often you can get them to come back and order. That's it. All other stats boil down to those. And the page speed of your site affects those in so many ways, through conversions, through bounces, and through additional traffic from SEO. So that's really where the title came from. So I think we're kind of on that thread already. It's not a direct correlation, but yeah, pretty much. All right, Mihai in the chat here. Mihai, thanks for watching. Mentions that it's a nice topic. I appreciate it. Sam is telling me that my glass is empty and I need another one. Well, I mean, I have a 2-hour drive right after this live stream. So we're not going to be able to go long today. I've got to jump in the car and get for, 2 hours. So it's still a little bit, I'm going to take it a little slow, a little easy. I'm trying not to drink all of these bottles. I don't know if you can see, but I'm starting to actually get a collection. When we first launched this stream, all these bottles were empty, but like these three here still have whiskey in them. We've got like a Scotch collection and Irish whiskey over here that still has whiskey in them. So we're not hitting it quite as hard as we used to, but we're enjoying it. We're trying to be connoisseurs here and not just hammer on the whiskey on a live stream. But this one is pretty good. I don't know what its distribution is. Being an Alabama whiskey, I'm assuming it's a local craft thing, but has a pretty good nose, pretty good flavor. Far from my favorite, but pretty good stuff. So let's continue on to our topic here. It really, in your opinion, is it possible this day and age to have good SEO rankings with a slow site?
Yeah, it is. I know of some websites which have a very low score and still rank high, but that's obviously because SEO is a combination of several factors. So yeah, it's absolutely possible.
So it is possible. It's one of those things where everything else has to be so good, though, because it's something you have to overcome.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, is there ever, if you're looking at Google PageSpeed Insights, is there ever a score that's good enough? If you're running your pages through the tool and you get your results, is there a number you should be happy with and you should just move on, or should you be constantly striving to try to get 100?
Well, yet again, I have to say you should focus on the individual metrics. So, yeah, I would say Yeah, it really depends, but we try to strive for a first meaningful paint under 1.5 seconds. 2 seconds could be okay as well. And the time to interactive also depends, but I would say try to have it below 10 seconds, maybe even 8, because when you've got a high time to interactive, it means a lot of JavaScript is still running, and while JavaScript is running, the main thread of the browser is still busy. So the browser is still busy thinking and doing its business. And in the meanwhile, the visitor can't interact with your web shop, or maybe it can interact, but at some time, maybe with a delay, or causing user frustration because the website isn't responding right away. So you should try to keep your time to interact as low as well. And when you succeed in optimizing your first meaningful paint as well as your time to interactive, obviously your score would increase as well, get better.
All right, a couple of more comments in the chat here. Sam is mentioning, do you think that a blog page with Magento should be fast for SEO? Now, that's I'm not exactly sure of the question there, Sam. You know, if you're asking technically if a blog with Magento, should be fast out of the box. I mean, obviously you want it to be fast. It depends on how you're implementing that blog as to whether or not it will be fast. Back in the day with Magento 1, you'd see a lot of people use WordPress, fish pig that data over into Magento, and then serve it from Magento, which I always thought, we had some clients do it, insist upon it, didn't want to theme a WordPress site, didn't want to use a subdomain or a subfolder that they didn't, whatever reason they chose to go that route. But serving something like that from Magento always seemed to be slower than just serving it from WordPress, just because. But there's some integrations there, some things you can do with products and stuff, which adds that overhead, which adds to that slowness. Magento 2, if you're talking about the enterprise edition with Page Builder, that should be faster, but you've still got a lot of e-commerce overhead there that you may need to tweak and optimize, and then getting Magento's JavaScript optimized is kind of a mess. Anything you want to add to that comment about should a Magento blog be fast?
Well, obviously it should be fast because there isn't a lot of resources you need on a blog page. But I'm afraid WordPress has the same culprit, as in WordPress is also loading all kinds of assets and resources which aren't needed on that specific page. So I'm afraid that's the cause of not getting a fast blog page. Obviously, when you've got a product page, there's a lot more going on, like the cart and maybe adding it to your wish list. But even then, when you've got a product page, you could choose to, although being hard to implement, but you could choose to lazy load your cart.js or maybe your search.js, as on the very moment a visitor reaches your product page for the first time, you don't need the product.js or cart.js, for example, in the very first milliseconds or the very first second. So that's where you could try to optimize by lazy loading your some JavaScript snippets. And I know of some good articles writing about how you should bundle, or rather not bundle, with HTTP2 in play. So yeah, the answer is a blog page should be fast. Yeah.
All right, another comment in the chat here. Most of the conversation is going on LinkedIn right now. If you happen to be watching this on another platform, it's pretty, several people watching over on YouTube, but it's pretty quiet over there. Got a good conversation going in the chat on LinkedIn here. Alan Fair, Alan, I appreciate you watching, and I appreciate this content. This comment, excuse me. Alan mentions that John Mueller from Google recommended a page load in 2 to 3 seconds or below, and that was way back in 2016. Do you think that's still kind of an accurate measure of how a page should load, is 2 to 3 seconds?
That's difficult to tell. Firstly, because I'm not a user experience researcher, but also it is possible that some people over the years, or maybe we in general over the years, got more impatient because internet is becoming faster in some places. Devices are getting newer, so we also expect maybe expect fast loading pages. So I guess 3 seconds is still a very good figure to strive for. Well, obviously, maybe you shouldn't go beyond the 3 seconds, obviously.
Okay. Walter in the chat here mentions, for example, in the Netherlands, we have a lot of people who are traveling from home to their work. So this means that a lot of people check websites during their travel. Good 4G network normally, but during the travel, the speed could be much lower, say 2 to 3G. So they're optimizing your website to those speeds is really important in our area. The first impression is really important. So that matters as well, right? Like to know how far you need to go, you really need to understand your audience and where, what their environment is when they're interacting with your site.
Yeah, true. Yeah, most of the time, at least in the Netherlands, and I guess it's not different in the States. When you're in a city, most of the time you've got optimal internet or good internet. When you reach the suburbans or maybe more rural places, then obviously you could go to 3G or even 2G internet. It's the same in Germany because, well, Germany is larger than the Netherlands, obviously. So you've got a lot of places where internet connection isn't that good or you don't have any internet at all. And even in the Netherlands, when traveling by train from one city to another city, it's possible that you don't have any internet at all. Well, when you've got 2G or 3G, what you still want to achieve is to let the user know that something is happening. And I guess that's the most important part. You want to let the user know something's happening. And you can do that by introducing inline critical CSS. And that's the part where what Wouter mentioned before. Within Magento 2.3.3, you can enable critical CSS. Obviously, you have to decide what CSS to inline. But by inlining critical CSS and get rid of random blocking resources, you can create a perceived performance, as in you can give the visitor the feeling that something is happening in its screen, and maybe even show the product title, the price, and maybe even the product image early on.
Yeah, the inline CSS is the thing that still throws me off a little bit. I've been around pretty much since this whole web thing took off, building websites, building e-commerce websites since then. I remember back in the day, you used to put the entire CSS in the header of the website. Like, it was all there. We didn't use external style sheets. And then it was like, oh my God, if you put any style in line in the site, it's bad news. You should never do that. Everything has to go in a style sheet. And now it's come back and it's messing with me. It's still something I have to get used to. That is the best practice, is, to make the site as perceived as fast as possible. You want that style sheet in there, or that style in there, so that the site doesn't have to load another external sheet, and you don't really know in what order it's going to load that. It has the style information it needs to start displaying that information. Sam in the chat here is curious to see your point of view with Varnish cache. What's the pros and cons of Varnish with Magento 2, server stabilization issues, etc.? Do you have a lot of experience with Varnish, and kind of what is your opinion in general of that type of caching?
I'm more of a front-end guy when it comes to performance, so I can't say a lot about Varnish. As it is more of a server-side matter. But obviously, when you can enable Varnish, I would say do so. Where we don't have any Varnish available, we try to do some server-side caching, for example. So product pages are server-side cached, but it's basically the same. But I can't really say any more about Varnish, as I'm more of a front-end performance guy.
Yeah, I'm gonna add a little bit to that, and I'm gonna talk about caching in general. The problem you have is that a lot of people think that caching is a remedy, a solution for a poor loading site. And that should never be the case. Cache is something to, maybe add to an already well, optimized site. Like you should never use cache to try to cover up your site being slow, because that's going to cause you other problems. Cache should just be something to take a fast site to that next level. That's really when caching works most effectively, and when people tend to have a ton of problems with it, it's oftentimes because their site is so poor and they think that's going to mask it.
Yeah, it's basically like SEO. It's a combination of optimizations. Yeah.
Right. All right. So Walter in the chat here, Walter mentions maybe talk about PWA versus old-fashioned bootstrapping. So what are your thoughts on, a PWA implementation versus, say, traditional website?
Then you're talking about server-side rendering versus client-side rendering, as
Right.
obviously, progressive web apps is built using JavaScript. The big advantage of progressive web app is that you don't have to, the JavaScript doesn't have to be executed on successive page views. So that's a huge advantage, obviously. At the same time, when a user doesn't have any JavaScript cached yet, then all JavaScript has to be downloaded and parsed for the very first time. And as client-side rendered websites or product pages, a lot of rendering has to be done. A lot of parsing and downloading and parsing has to be done on the first page visit. So it's quite difficult to optimize a client-side rendered environment, because all rendering is done using JavaScript. So it both has advantages on different levels, basically. So you can't really compare it. You just have to choose the right strategy fitting your audience as well. For example, when you've got a lot of I don't hope so, but when you've got a lot of Internet Explorer visitors, then client-side rendering might not be the perfect solution.
All right, so keep those questions coming. We've got an hour booked here, so we're about 37 minutes into this live stream. So we've got about 23 minutes left if you keep those questions coming. If I run out of things to talk about, I'm going to get out of here because I've got a 2-hour drive ahead of me. So I would much rather hang out for the remaining 23 minutes with you fine folks and getting you answers on how to improve your page speed. All right, so Alan in the chat here. Alan, again, thanks for watching. And again, thanks for this comment. Overall, we found that 75% plus score in insights is generally enough to get moving on to other things. Then spend time later getting it higher up, but agree first paint is really important for the visitor to feel the site is there for them to use. Alan makes an interesting point here. You've got a website. This is a living, breathing animal. There is always something to be done on the site to make it better. And so, yes, you could continue pushing for a higher and higher and higher score. But, in Alan's opinion here, if you get above 75%, then maybe it's time to move on to something else that may have a bigger impact on your business. Come back to this later when those bigger things are done. Is that 75%? You think that's accurate? What's your opinion on that comment?
I think he mentioned first meaningful pain, did he? Or did he mention another metric?
He kind of mentioned that first paint is really important. He didn't give a number on first paint, but he's saying, overall that typically, 75% score kind of gets you all the other metrics that make the site at least acceptable so you can move on to kind of higher value items.
Yeah. Once again, I think you should pick some metrics, individual metrics, and focus on the individual metrics, because the overall score isn't saying that much. But when you've got an optimal first contentful paint or maybe first meaningful paint, I would say focus on the first meaningful paint. Then there could be a score from which you could say, okay, this is it. We're going to do some monitoring now, see if conversions increase, and then maybe afterwards start doing some other optimizations. Obviously, you can try to strive to 100%, but there is a moment where your efforts may be too much and not being it's not just being too much. You could try
right.
to do WebP images, for example, or yeah, changing your WAF font files for WAF2 font files, but that's not making a big impact anymore.
All right, guys, we are got about 20 minutes left. I want to remind you that this live stream is sponsored by Mage Mojo. If you need Magento hosting, give them a call. Go over to MageMojo, MageMojo.com. Check them out. Ask them about horizontal auto scaling. Tell them I told you all about it, even though I'm not real good at selling anything. I'm actually going to pull up some sites here in just a second, but if you're watching this, if you see any of our content, we really would like to get this audience up a little bigger. And I need your help to do that. I can't do that on my own. So I feel like we're doing a pretty good job of putting out good content, picking good titles, getting good guests. I want to continue to be able to do that. So if you see this or any of my polished content, do me a favor, give them a thumbs up, share these things out. See if if you enjoy this and you want us to continue doing these things, then help us grow this audience. I've got a new video that just came out this morning over on YouTube about 5 reasons for you to choose Magento over Shopify. And we're going to do the Shopify over Magento next week, and we've got BigCommerce versus Shopify. We're doing a whole series of videos, and I feel like those polished videos are getting pretty good. And so if you would, give those a thumbs up. Help me share those out. We post those on LinkedIn here as well if you happen to see them. Alan Fair in the comments here, he aims at first paint for the 1 to 2 seconds, like you mentioned. More than that, and you really start losing people, especially on mobile. So 1 to 2 seconds seems to be the consensus. So let's go live here. Let's look at some sites. Now I'm gonna increase the video back to you, Erwin. So guys, if we have some problems with Erwin's feed, but I want him to be able to see this video. So if we have some problems with his feed, we will adapt and overcome and adjust. But this is the first time I've used this view. You'll see my screen just got a lot brighter over here because I need to be able to see it as well. But we're gonna go to this swanky view right here, and this is a page speed insight. Now this is a page speed insight for my website, jamerson.com. Now before we get into this, one thing of note is this is a PWA. This is a Gatsby.js static generated progressive web app site. This thing was in the 90 plus when we launched it. I don't know what's changed, but we'll work on that. We got to get it back up to 90 plus. So we're at 83. So overall, based on what we've said in this conversation, we're doing okay. Like that's pretty good. But let's get down and let's look at some of the details of this. 50 to 89 is that yellow acceptable range. We really try to target 90 when we built this thing, and it was well over 90 when it launched. Of course, we don't get a ton of traffic, so it doesn't have a whole lot of real-world data to help us there. But our first contentful paint is 2.9 seconds. So you guys say 1 to 2 seconds, and this is 2.9 seconds. Is that bad? Like, do I need to try to push this down to 1.9 seconds? Or when you say 1 to 2, does under 3 count? Like, how bad is 2.9?
I would say, well, I can't see the first minute for paint. What's the first minute for paint here?
4. It's 4 seconds. So we're garbage on that.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. I would also always try to keep the first minute for paint the same as the content for paint, but this is where the difference in client-side rendered solutions kick in, because the first content for paint is telling you something about when the first pixel is being drawn or painted by your browser. So that could be the first the first part of maybe text or image, for example, your logo. But from there on, often the logo is within the initial HTML payload already, so that could be the first contentful paint here. And then I would say that the 2.9 seconds is indeed a bit slow, because there is, when you do client-side rendering, there is no need to do any rendering on the server side. So it should be possible to get the first contentful paint a bit lower when doing client-side rendering, or when doing server-side rendering, and when you're doing some server-side caching as well on top of it, then a low first contentful paint should be possible as well. But when you look at the first meaningful paint, and once again, this is where the difference between client-side rendering and server-side rendering kicks in. When you have some server-side rendered product pages, then it is easier to optimize the first meaningful paint as well. It is easier to get the same score for your first contentful paint as well as the first meaningful paint, because no rendering has to be done using JavaScript. So there is no reliance on external JavaScript. But in your case, when doing client-side rendering using JavaScript, after the first pixels has been drawn or painted by the browser, that's where the first contentful paint kicks in. Additional rendering has to be done using JavaScript, but that JavaScript has to be downloaded and parsed and executed first before something can happen in your browser. So that's why there is a difference between your first contentful paint and your first meaningful paint. So I would say in your case, it should be easy to optimize your first contentful paint, but at the same time, as the term is saying by itself, the first contentful paint isn't saying anything about the meaningful paint. And the meaningful paint obviously is maybe your block titles or your hero image, for example. So what I try to do is always focus on the first meaningful paint instead, because when you've got when you succeed in optimizing your first meaningful paint, obviously your first contentful paint is becoming better as well.
Now, it does look like, just looking at these little, I don't know if you could see these little pictures of, it doesn't give me exact labels of, I don't know if there's like some standard for how far apart those are. It does look like, the thing is I'm looking at this, and this fifth one right here is when the actual hero image loads up. And nothing changes, at least in the top half of the site, during or after that one. So I'm not sure exactly what Google's seeing. I guess another question is, how important is it actually versus perceived? Like if there's some anomaly where it looks fine in actuality, but Google is looking for something that happens in the background but doesn't actually happen for a user. How important is it that Google understands how fast it is versus how fast it actually looks? Because, top half of the fold, we're, after like 5 of those blocks, it's completely rendered.
I don't know if I understand because you're asking several questions at the moment, but it is.
Well, yeah, I think the question is, how important is it for Google to understand that the site is fast? For instance, I would argue here that maybe, just maybe, we're doing something that doesn't have any difference to the user, but Google is measuring it and penalizing us for it, right? Like the site is done here on this 5th block, but Google's still waiting for something in the background that doesn't necessarily affect the user. How important is it that I find that and rectify that situation?
Well, it is important for the user in such a sense that the fifth image until the last image, that's most likely where time to interactive is in play, as in some JavaScript is still busy running in the background, and that could impact the time to interactive and also the user experience. And as Google is focusing on user experience as well, you should also take that into account. But yet again, real user experience is obviously more important than just a score. And I should say in this case, in each case when testing by using PageSpeed Insights, the test is done using a Motorola Moto 4G device, G4 device, I mean, on a 3G connection. So you could always try to extract some data from your analytics to discover what device used by your audience. Because as you said before, you don't have any real user measurements here. So it is yeah. There is no you can't extract real data from PageSpeed Insights.
Now we had a mention in the chat here. Let me see if Alan mentions that you should run this a few times because you can get a different result depending on the load at the time of the test. So I'm going to click it again. Let's see what happens. Let's cross our fingers that it actually goes up this time. Let's see. We're going to analyze it. It's probably going to go down. It's probably going to be like terrible. It's probably going to be red now. Now that I'm doing it, never go hot, okay? Always have controlled variables in a live stream. Look, exactly the same thing. I did have a question over on YouTube I wanted to get to real quick. Suzanne Bartman or Susan Bartman. Suzanne, is it Suzanne or Susan? Really depends on, I think, the way that's spelled, if it's in the South or whether you're not in the South. But Suzanne, thank you for watching. I appreciate your question. And maybe talk about font loading. So I'm going to switch back to our split view. We'll come back to this. I've got another one of these I want to look at. But let's talk about font loading real quick in regards to PageSpeed.
Yeah, there are different font loading strategies. You can. It really depends on what your branding department wants. For example, I know of some companies who want their custom font being loaded directly. Yeah, there is quite a lot of nuance in optimizing your font loading strategy. I always try to apply a fallback font, and in the meanwhile load a custom font in the background. So lazy load your custom font as well, because yeah, visible text is always more readable, for example, than invisible text, obviously. So I would always vouch for using a font loading strategy where you are using a fallback font, and maybe try to adjust the fallback font by changing its letter spacing. So the fallback font is quite similar to the custom font once the custom font kicks in.
All right, so hopefully that answered your question. Let me know if you need more clarification. I'll be happy to get to it. We've got about 7 minutes left here on the stream. We're going to go back to this. I want to look at something real quick here. First of all, this is Amazon.com, the #1 e-commerce platform in the United States. I mean, it's equal to everybody else's. You know, it's half the market in the United States. So 58 is their PageSpeed Insight, but look at the first contentful paint and first meaningful paint, and that is 3.1 and 3.4 seconds. So they're kind of in that range of 3 seconds, but then again, their overall score is pretty bad. So it doesn't seem to be hurting them, but you're not Amazon, so you've got to figure out some way of standing out. Any comments, any thoughts on Amazon's score here?
Well, the time to interactive isn't that far away from their first meaningful paint. So they don't have a lot of, well, they do have a lot of JavaScript, obviously, but not as much as the average shop I see. But it does surprise me that their first contentful paint and first meaningful paint is this high. So yeah, they should try to improve the first meaningful paint, so they're also improving the perceived performance and could increase conversion as well.
All right. So we had one in the chat. Sam posted one. Of course, he posted an underwear site, but we're not going to pull the site up. But I am going to pull its PageSpeed Insights, and this is using accelerated mobile pages, which is interesting. So The site is ufmunderwear.com. It automatically forwards you to the AMP page. And what I got was a 51, but its first paint contentful is 1.1, meaningful is 1.7. So the overall score, which, you know, Google's grading you on a lot of things, PWA stuff, like all sorts of stuff. So, you know, if you're not really trying to push toward a progressive web app, then, you know, these are the metrics that you need to be paying attention to. And with an AMP page, they seem to be incredible. What are your thoughts?
Well, this is a good example in such a way that the first meaningful paint is quite different. There's quite a gap between the first meaningful paint and the time to interactive. So my first conclusion would be, and I think this is also the case, that there is a lot of JavaScript going on. I know that when you want to use some functionalities using JavaScript, that you have to embed individual JavaScript files. But at the same time, those JavaScript files are render blocking, and they have to be parsed, downloaded, obviously parsed and executed before anything can happen. So the parsing is done for in this case 9.9 seconds. So it is blocking the main thread. So I would say be a bit more picky about what what AMP libraries you want to use. And this is where I would say try to optimize your own. I don't know if this is a product page, but otherwise I would say try to optimize your own original product page, because it is easier to, for example, lazy load some libraries than when using AMP, because in the case of AMP, you have to embed all libraries within the head part, the head section of your website. And when you're optimizing yourself, then you've got more freedom. That's actually the case. You've got more freedom when optimizing yourself, and then you can decide to lazy load some libraries.
All right, guys, I think that is about it. We've got about 3 minutes left here, but I am going to call that a stream. I think we got through all of the questions that we had. Erwin, I want to thank you for joining us. If anybody has any questions about PageSpeed or anything else that you do, how can they get in touch with you?
They can visit my website, and that's Erwin Hofman, or in Dutch erwinhofman.nl, or just send me an email using info@erwinhofman.nl, or obviously LinkedIn or Twitter as well.
Yeah, and if you post, if you can't find him, post it in the comments of any of the places this live stream went out, and I will relay those messages over and try to get you answers. As always, it's very helpful if you guys would give this a big old thumbs up. Share it out if you're on a platform that allows you to do so. I appreciate you watching, and I will see you next time.